What's up you guys, Keith DeMello here. Welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to talk about how to find a flight school in Canada. Stay tuned. The first step in finding a flight school in Canada is to identify your aviation goals. Are you going to be flying for fun? Or are you going to fly for a career? Are you going to fly full-time or part-time? What kind of airplanes do you want to fly? Do you want to fly a Cessna with a high wing? Or you want to fly a Piper airplane with a low wing? Do you want to fly an airplane with a glass cockpit or with the traditional flight instruments? And maybe you also want to ensure that your flight school has connections with an airline so that when you finish your flight training, you will get hired by a regional or an airline directly. So first, identify exactly what you want, and then it makes your search process that much easier. Once you have identified your aviation goals, it's now time to do research into the flight school you're going to train at. Now, as a bonus, if you keep watching through the rest of the video, I will give you a list of flight schools that I recommend. As you know, Canada is a big country, and there's probably over 30 flight schools that you can apply to. So what I want you to do is to take a list of at least 10 flight schools, do some deep research into each one of them, and then narrow it down to a list of maybe 5 flight schools, and then go ahead and apply to all 5 of them. So now, how do you decide on which flight school to apply to? They're actually trying to get you to join them and pay tuition to them instead of going to another flight school, because a flight school, after all, is a business. So you need to review the promotional marketing material that each flight school sends out. You can even go on their website, and if they do a good job, they'll actually identify all the areas that I'm going to be talking about coming up. So the first thing I want you to inquire about the financing. Does the flight school provide any sort of financing? If you don't have the money, will they provide you a loan? The other thing is about accommodation. Some flight schools provide accommodation nearby to the flight school so that you don't have to take a long transit commute to get there. Maybe the accommodation will be a type of student shared accommodation. You might share your accommodation with 5 other students, but you shouldn't really care because you're just there to do your flight training and then leave. Another thing you want to look at is transit to and from the flight school, because some flight schools are actually quite secluded from a main city, and the only means of transportation is probably an expensive taxi cab or an Uber. So you want to see if there's any public transportation that's actually available to the flight school. And I'm talking about it from personal experience. That's something that I made a mistake in. I chose a flight school that was actually quite secluded, and the only way I could get there was when my dad finished his work, so I could only fly after hours or on the weekends. So don't make the same mistake that I made. If you're an international student, you also want to ensure that the flight school is an accredited flight school, because when you do apply for a student visa, you want to ensure that the government recognizes this flight school as a flight school that you can apply to and get your training done. So ensure that the flight school is one that will allow you to get an accreditation so that you can apply for a student visa. So some other points you can ask the flight school, and this is something I wish I had asked when I first started training, is find out if the flight school is a controlled airport or uncontrolled airport. And now what does that mean? A controlled airport means an airport with an air traffic control tower. An uncontrolled airport is one without an air traffic control tower. So why does that matter? Well, it does matter for the type of experience you're going to gain. In a controlled airport, you have experience talking with air traffic control. So when you do fly in real life, it's not going to be a massive change because you've always been talking with air traffic control, and you get the idea of how to make your radio calls, how to get clearances. Versus an uncontrolled airport, there's no control tower. So the way you actually get around the airport is you just broadcast your intentions. You say, Alpha Bravo Charlie is taxiing to this runway. Alpha Bravo Charlie is taking off. Alpha Bravo Charlie is landing. So you're in control of your own separation between your airplane and another airplane. But there's actually pros to training at an uncontrolled airport. I've done both. The pro to training at an uncontrolled airport is you can actually get to where you want to go, the practice area where you do your training, much quicker. You don't have to worry about big airlines coming into your airport and making it for a longer time to get to where you need to go to do your upper airwork training. You actually pay for any time the propeller is rotating. So the propeller is rotating longer and you're staying on the ground taxiing. It'll actually save you a lot of time on the airplane and actually ends up saving you money. Another very important thing to inquire about is instructor experience. And yes, there's different types of instructors with different experience levels. In Canada, there's 4 levels of flight instructor. You start off as a Class 4 flight instructor, then you move up to a Class 3 instructor, then a Class 2 instructor, and then finally a Class 1 instructor. And each of these instructor levels have different levels of testing and different experience requirements, and they have to prove that they're able to teach these students well and that the students are performing well and that they pass a certain amount of marks on their flight test. Another very important discussion point with a flight school is to find out what kind of terrain and weather this airport experiences. As you're aware, Canada is a vast country and we have everything from mountainous regions in the west to flat terrain in the east. If you train in the west coast of Canada, in British Columbia for example, you will have mountainous terrain, and that provides nice flying experience and beautiful flying views when you're flying around mountains. Versus if you're flying in the east coast of Canada, you don't have mountains, but you do have a lot of challenging weather and snowstorms because it's located so close to the Atlantic Ocean. Another thing about weather is that in Canada, our winters are usually about 4 to 5 months in a year. So if you're flying in a place like Vancouver, you're going to have more flying days, good weather days to fly in, versus if you fly somewhere in the east coast of Canada, you're going to have much lesser days of good weather to fly in. So that's something to keep in mind depending how fast you want to get your flight training done. And the last point I'm going to make is try to see if you can get a tour of the school. If you can't fly over here to Canada to tour each and every school, maybe the school can provide you with a virtual tour. Some schools, they have a video on their website that goes through the entire school, shows you the simulators, the ground school briefing rooms, the airplanes, the hangars, everything that you're going to use on a daily basis. I personally prefer schools that are maintained properly, where it looks like they keep their airplanes well painted, their classrooms well painted, and the equipment doesn't look like something from the 1970s. Now, once you've done research into those flight schools, I want you to further narrow your list down to about 5 flight schools that you're going to apply to each and every one of them, because you want to increase your chances of getting accepted. Now, at the beginning of the video, I said I'm going to recommend a few flight schools as a bonus if you stuck through the very end. So some of the flight schools that I recommend for you to get started with, you don't have to go to any of these flight schools, and I'm not affiliated with any of these flight schools. But some of the flight schools that I recommend checking out is Harv's Air in Manitoba, Spectrum Airways in Ontario, Brampton Flying Club in Ontario, Moncton Flying Club. The rest of them I will actually link in the description below. So I'll give you the websites to those flying schools and you can actually email them directly and get some more information. Now guys, before I go on to give you some bonus tips that may make or break your decision, and this is something that's come up for the last 3 years as Canada has now evolved to a more European model where they're actually starting to hire or partner with flight schools to take students directly from the flight school to the airlines. So as you guessed, the first tip is going to be see if your flight school has any connections with any of the regional airlines or major airlines. Now, an important thing to keep in mind is that they don't actually take every student at graduation. Usually they'll take the top maybe 3 to 4 students a year, and it's kind of like winning the lottery. But if you can get hired at an airline directly at a flight school, that's something you want to check out. Another bonus tip, see if the flight school will hire you for a job while you're training. And that's something I've seen a lot of students do in order to supplement their flight training costs. You can get hired as a rampy, towing airplanes, fueling airplanes. You can also ask them if you can get hired as a dispatcher, flight follower. Most importantly, see if the flight school hires their own students as flight instructors. The flight school that I trained at, unfortunately, didn't hire me as a flight instructor, even though I was given a verbal promise that I would be hired. So I had to go elsewhere to get a job as a flight instructor, and luckily I did. But it saves a lot of time and effort if you're going to spend the $10,000 roughly to get your flight instructor rating, to then go and get hired by the same flight school. And usually as a flight instructor, you build hours quite quickly, especially if your school is very busy. After 3 years, you could probably have 1,200 hours of flying and then move on to the regional airlines. Well guys, I hope this video was helpful to you. If you really like these type of videos, please mention it in the comments below, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and I will see you next time.